Begin. Now we have the pause. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Roundtable 1 of the Ministerial Policy Review Session, Healthy Environment, Healthy People. The dialogue will have as a basis the thematic report on healthy environment, healthy people, UNEP/EA.2/INF/5. In line with the agreed agenda, after the plenary introductory session, the Ministerial Policy Review continues with two parallel roundtables, this is one of which we're speaking about, to discuss the same theme in a smaller setting. We have for this roundtable the pleasure to be able to benefit from the expertise and the experience of three discussants who will share their views during the course of our discussions this morning. Mr. Omar Abdi, the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director, United Nations Children's Fund. Mr. Abdi, welcome. Mr. Braulio Ferreira de Souza Diaz, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. Mr. Souza Diaz, welcome. Dr. Leonardo Trasande, Associate Professor, Department of Environmental Medicine of the New York University School of Medicine. Dr. Trasande, welcome. We'll organize our discussions this morning in two sequences. We'll discuss the examples of existing policies and experiences which are already delivering in an integrated manner to address environment and health linkages. As I've learned and as was explained in the previous session, certain ministers are still in line and waiting to deliver their statements. So the floor will be given to the ministers that have signed up before. We'll try to focus our debates on the priorities and suggest means and ways to enable scaled-up actions to deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We look forward to a genuine interaction among the ministers and the discussants. So I'd like to ask you to keep your interventions to a maximum of 3 minutes. And I think that, again, the system is that if you like to take the floor, you raise your country flag. But since we already have a number of distinguished ministers in line, I think that they have the priority, and we'll begin by actually giving them the floor. So if you allow me, and also I'd like to express my gratitude for my dear colleague, His Excellency Dr. Daniel Ortega Pachao, the Minister of Environment of Ecuador, who we're going to co-chair together this session. And if you allow me, I'll start my introductory remarks, and I'll try to be as concise as possible. Initially, I'd like to thank UNIA for addressing this very important issue on healthy environment and healthy people. And I'd like to commend Dr. Achim Steiner for his achievements, both in bringing up this very important issue at this high level, and also for all what he has done during the past decade for the global environment. Initially, allow me to briefly introduce myself. In addition to being in charge of the environment in the Islamic Republic of Iran, I'm an associate professor of immunology at Tarbiyat Modares University. So I might have a perspective on the nexus between both health but also immunology, which is the immune system, the way that both humans but also other biological systems respond to threats to their to their systems, to their health. I think that from this perspective, what we're dealing with is an issue, the nexus between health and the environment is an issue which requires more recognition at this level. It seems that somehow we have not paid enough attention to this issue, and it's an interdisciplinary area, and it seems that now this connection is being made. The WHO needs to pay more attention at the international level. There needs to be more connection between international bodies on this issue, and we were very glad to listen to Dr. Chan, but I think that the WHO has to do much more in this regard because they do have a global action plan on non-communicable diseases, and it's quite surprising to see that there's very little on the environmental etiology of diseases, non-communicable diseases, a large amount of which are now we understand that about the statistics that they were giving, about 23% of the deaths that occur every year can be attributed to environmental issues, and also 60% of the emerging infectious diseases are also with a zoonotic background. So I'd like to make this point that it's very important that we're discussing this, and I hope that the connection between the two international organizations, the UNIA and the WHO, will continue because these interdisciplinary and translational sciences, they're not always well addressed. Usually those who address them have to be well versed in both areas and disciplines. According to the environmentalists, it's important for the clinicians, the physicians, to understand and comprehend the environmental challenges and issues that we have, and for the physicians and for the health experts, it's important for the environmentalists to understand their perspectives. I think we have a lot of work to do in this regard. Actually, we had a meeting last year in Iran. I was invited by the Iranian Association of Cardiologists to speak about air pollution, and this was the first time, and I told them it's about time that the cardiologists start speaking and thinking about the environmental impact of the health impacts of air pollution. I think that this is, I think, an important development. We need to give more attention to air pollution, both as a regional and as an international issue. We do not have enough international mechanisms addressing this. Just recently, regional coalitions are taking shape, but it is a very, very serious issue. The scientific connection is very important. Pollutants, we see in the environmental perspective, we see pollutants, the small molecules in the air or in water or in the soil or coming in the food chain. But pollutants are small molecules which can easily not enter the bloodstream, but they can also enter cells. They can interact with proteins which are usually biological mediators and have important roles in defining our health system, our physiological basis. It can influence, for example, the complement cascade. It can influence cytokines. It can influence the signaling and regulation of cell cycles and cell metabolism. So these pollutants are interacting not only with the proteins and the biological mediators in our bloodstreams, but sometimes they interact with cell receptors. For example, on the T cell receptor, we have an aryl hydrocarbon receptor, which is well known to interact with dioxin. It's the natural ligand is not dioxin. obviously, but when we have dioxin in the environment and comes in the bloodstream, it interacts with the aryl hydrocarbon receptor on the T cell. The T cell is a major cell regulating and performing the functions of the immune system, and then we get into problems. Then you get an immune response which is not commensurate with the natural response that the body needs. Then it might develop into a autoimmune disease, or it might develop into cancer or other complications. And then it goes one stage, and the knowledge that we have, the scientific knowledge that we have on this issue, is that the pollutants can go one stage further, and they can also influence the genetic content and particularly the epigenetics of the cell. That means that even during fetus formation, environmental pollutants can affect the genetic background of the newborn and in later life. And we're seeing this in the clinic more and more, and the alarming rate of, for example, asthma in newborns and young children. So this is more and more becoming a very important issue. The scientific basis for the nexus between the environment and between health and, in our perspective, the issue of the immune system. And the same goes with, for example, not only air pollutants, but pesticides, and the same goes for estrogen-like substances, heavy metals, radiation. They can all influence not only the immune system, but also the central nervous system and other systems which are life support systems in a sense. So I'd just like to mention this to just maybe identify some of, and open a window on the scientific basis that we have for this important discussion, and also to emphasize the importance of bringing up these issues at the international level and maybe developing efficient mechanisms on exchanging information and experiences and dealing with these issues at regional and international levels. And questions come up such as like, should we categorize air pollution under the theme of climate change? Is this correct to see air pollution only as a subdivision of climate change issues, or is this an important issue in itself that needs to be addressed separately? And I think that this is an issue that more and more developing countries are coming up with this challenge and the necessity to tackle air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. And just to round up what I have to say, in the Islamic Republic of Iran, we have comprehensive national plans to tackle air pollution, water pollution, sound management of waste, and since as a rapidly developing and industrializing country, we think that the environmental impact assessment is very important in making this linkage between maintaining health standards in our society and also being able to progress in terms of the objectives of the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that this issue has profound implications on the way that we see our policies or formulate our policies in our countries, and I hope that we'll have a fruitful discussion on this issue today. So thank you very much, and I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Daniel Ortega, the Minister of Environment of Ecuador, for his remarks on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the words and introductory remarks of our distinguished co-chair, Her Excellency, Vice President of Iran. I should also say that the information that she has put on the table is very illustrative and set out important framework for our discussions today, coming from more scientific background. I would also like to thank UNEA for addressing this important issue of the linkages between health and environment. I would like to focus my intervention to share with you some of the elements of the experience that we have had in Ecuador with respect to a transformative pathway to addressing the environment and health linkage at different levels. The clear evidence of the impacts of environmental developments, particularly climate change on health, is well proven. Environment and health is a central priority in Ecuador as we transform our economy and our society. We have framed a paradigm, a new conceptual model for development. We call it Buen Vivir. This is a concept that puts together human and social well-being in harmony with nature. We base that development model upon the notion that our Constitution also incorporates the recognition of the rights of nature. And that is a critical element for how we have developed our national plan and priorities. We know that health outcomes are intrinsically linked to poverty levels and environmental circumstances as well as health services. The programmatic approach that we have undertaken to link health and environment has allowed also to make Ecuador available to reduce poverty levels in a multidimensional fashion. We have lifted over 1 million people out of poverty. This has required huge investments in health, for first time free access for everyone. We have also invested to increase the quality of our fossil fuels, so the impact in air quality is reduced. We have also attempted to reduce other environmental contamination through the use of incentives. These come in the ways of taxes, but also in biological infrastructure, vital to health and often more resilient, as we learned with the recent earthquake that we have faced. In particular, most of the affected areas with this earthquake were related with coastal areas, where mangrove was affected a couple of decades ago because of the development of the shrimp industry. Now, taking further action to clean air, we will be hosting Habitat Convention in October, and the notion to the rights to the city, to a clean city, to a sustainable city, is at the center of the discussion of a new urban agenda. We have introduced also the need for electric buses, higher levels of sustainable transportation, greener areas, as most of the Latin American cities, we face about 70% of our population in urban areas. But at the heart of this notion to increase the quality of our services with respect to health and to prevent further disease, we also understood that we needed to conduct a change in our matrix of the economy. And we are targeting the new developments and investments in our infrastructure and development of knowledge based upon biodiversity. We truly trust that biodiversity can provide the basis for achieving forest social justice and environmental justice. And when we talk about what we have done in Ecuador, it always comes to our mind that everything departed from changing the rules of the game. And we believe that at the international level that this is something that we should also explore. We know that at international level, the rising temperatures and the driving huge dislocation of people, extreme weather and disease. As a recent report from UNEF indicates, the first cause of the death of children is climate change, simply because it drives vectors for disease to tropical areas and to non-tropical areas as we have not seen in the past. This is what also calls to huge health impacts from transnational corporations' activities in developing countries. In the case of Ecuador, the pollution from Chevron, the oil impacts, the impact of oil activities continue to generate health impacts in our population in one of the most poor areas in the Amazonian. We need international framework that can deliver the transformational shift in the world economy needed to keep temperature at safe values, but at the same time, we need to reduce the gap in the framework that we have to protect large investments in the international level, but the absence of a legal system that can help us to make emphasis that protecting the human rights can also be entrusted and achieved if we protect the rights of nature. It's very difficult for us to explain what there are specific investments, tribunals, and courts, but we do not have an international court of justice, and we are reluctant yet to explore the possibility to have a universal declaration of the rights of nature. That should be at the center of our discussions if we are to change the rules of the game in a preventive fashion so that the health impacts are reduced in first place. Human rights framework provides a specific model of something that has proven to be useful. As a society, we were able also to achieve a different social pact. We believe that if we continue to work towards the recognition of the rights of nature, we will be in a better position not only to deliver on the sustainable development goals, but to deliver real and concrete material benefits to society, both in developing countries and developing world. These are some of the elements that we wanted to share with you, departing from our own experience at home, understanding the role that the legal framework can have, the whole institutional architecture that we have for environmental governance has on achieving a true linkage and a beneficial linkage between the use of resources, health, and environment. Thank you very much.
So you can continue.
Mm-hmm.
These are the countries.
So now, provided these initial remarks, honorable ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to open the floor for discussion. We would like us to focus first during these roundtables on example of existing policies, experiences which are already delivering in an integrated manner to address environment and health linkages. Two guiding questions which were shared with you in the background note to this session are going to support the first part of the discussion. First, given the interlinkages between human health and the health of the environment, what kind of policies are needed at the national level to ensure the adoption of integrated responses to address environment and health? The second, what is being done in your countries, including at the local level and in the regions that could provide examples of best practices that at the same time can provide the basis for transformative change in addressing environment and health linkages. As was presented by our distinguished Vice President of Iran, we have a list of speakers that initiated yesterday. And the list of speakers at this point of time is United States, Switzerland, Argentina, and Turkey. If there are other countries that would like also to... Oh, these are the first four. Okay. So the first one, United States of America, is ready. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And I would just like to say that we really appreciate the comments that both you and your co-chair have made this morning, because they touch on so many of the themes that I myself was going to try to bring forward. So I'll try to address those as I go. And with the admonition yesterday of the President that he really is trying to stimulate a dialogue, even though I have some points to make, I'll also try to make it more conversational, because I think it's what we're all seeking here, is a really interactive interchange among delegates. We think it's a very appropriate time, a very appropriate week to be talking about health and the environment, in particular because, as was mentioned by many, and the co-chair especially, the WHO is meeting this week in Geneva. So symbolically, we think this is terrific that UNEP is taking up this issue at this level this week. As you know, as in many countries, the environmental movement began in our country as a health movement. Many were alarmed at the effects of episodic pollution, things like the 1993 smog incident in New York City that killed hundreds of people. But then also, and in particular, it was Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, in 1962, that catalyzed a very broad environmental movement. Silent Spring described how DDT entered the food chain and accumulated in the fatty tissues of animals and humans, causing cancer and other devastating health effects. The book's most haunting and famous chapter was called A Fable for Tomorrow, which describes a town where all life, from fish to birds to apple blossoms to human children, had been silenced by the insidious effects of DDT. Gripped by the prospect of this type of dystopian future, the American public demanded greater environmental action and protection of the air, land, water, on which human and other life relies. We, as a result, created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970, and the general use of DDT was banned in the United States in 1972. This is an example responding to your question about what policies can you take. This was a very early one for us. Banning DDT, though, is just one of several areas in which we've made significant progress in environmental protection that also protects human health. But together, we acknowledge we still have much more to do. As policymakers, our actions are informed by a growing body of robust and clear scientific evidence of the links between health and the environment and the health of people. Millions of people suffer every year in a terrible firsthand way from environmental exposure to toxins like mercury and lead that can have terrible health consequences, especially for the neurological development of children. That's why we have prioritized work such as the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead in Paint. And we're working with partners to eliminate lead in decorative paints just as we have done at home, to do this internationally as we've done at home. This is a very simple action, one that should be very much within our grasp, and we really strongly support this effort. I was going to mention the number of diseases that stem from environmental causes this morning, but my colleague told me that the number I had is way too low. So I don't want to get into this debate. I think I'll just say that we think a large number of diseases have environmental causes, and we'll leave to others to give us the exact percentage. But a growing amount of scientific data demonstrates the dangers of air pollution, as was mentioned by our co-chair. The world's largest single environmental health risk, contributing to more than 7.4 million premature deaths in 2012 alone. This is why we made improving air quality and transitioning to clean energy a shared strategic priority, and we are committed to continue on this important work, on this important issue here in UNEP and elsewhere. We were delighted 2 years ago at UNEA 1 when there was a resolution on air quality. That work has now been taken up in the program of work and budget here at UNEP, and we think that's really superb. We really commend the work that UNEP is doing in this area. In response, though, the co-chair asked a very provocative question earlier in her remarks. She said, is air pollution just a subset of climate change, or is air pollution a kind of a thing in itself? I think I have to say we fully agree that it is not simply a subset of climate change, but in fact the two are very much linked. And this is a reason, for example, that we were strong supporters and we remain strong supporters of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is trying to address some of these linkages. So it's not that one is a subset of the other, but it's the interlinkage between the two, because we think taking action to address air pollution, for example, on mercury, can also address greenhouse gas emissions. So I thank you for that question. I think it was very timely. But as others have pointed out, ecosystem and animal health is also critical to human health. It's essential to understand and act on the health links between the environment, animals, livestock, and humans. Chemical contaminants in the ecosystem damage animal and human health, and in addition, more than 2/3 of emerging infectious diseases come from other animals. On our ever more crowded planet, there is increasing contact between humans and wild and domestic animals. This was a point I made earlier this week in the earlier session. This gives pathogens more chances to cross between species, including to people. The United States is working with partners on the One Health initiative, which brings together scientists, doctors, and others to observe and study these linkages. Other emerging health issues reinforce the links between environment and health as well. We now understand that pharmaceuticals are entering the environment and water supply, often as wastes. Traces of pharmaceutical medications have been detected in terrestrial and aquatic systems around the world, and in some cases at levels meeting or even exceeding therapeutic levels described in patients, or prescribed to patients. The presence of pharmaceuticals in the environment, if not effectively managed, has the potential to threaten the functioning of ecosystems, to disrupt food chains, and foster antimicrobial resistance that jeopardizes human and animal health and the environment. We are supportive of the work on this issue already taking place under the strategic approach to international chemicals management and encourage UNEP and WMO's continued engagement in that area. Finally, I would just like to say that addressing these difficult environmental health challenges will not be easy, as we all know. The measures each of our countries adopts nationally will be critical. We all value the essential role that UNEP plays in galvanizing political will to address these issues through raising awareness, and how UNEP's information sharing makes our national and regional efforts more effective. We can reap benefits of long-standing intersectoral and multi-sector relationships, so working together using all the tools at our disposal, we can achieve a healthy environment and healthy people. I would just say, finally, that I think we've found, in particular, UNEP's efforts at voluntary partnerships to have been extremely effective, both because they can be done quickly with a minimum of bureaucracy and administrative complication, and because they've been so effective, particularly in things like getting lead out of gasoline, in getting lead out of paint, and in other areas. So we strongly urge continued focus and attention to the ways that we can use these partnerships to achieve those goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States, for a very comprehensive position on the topic that we are exploring. I also salute the possibility for us to have a more interactive exchange. I think that that should perhaps bring additional incentive for us to have a more productive discussion. If I may, I should highlight some of the elements of your intervention just to provide us a sense of how the interactions can be conducted. You mentioned the possibility for us to learn from the past experiences where the impact in different elements of the supply chain or in people was conducive to policy outcomes. Let's say the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in your case, in our case, a different constitution because of the contamination of international cooperation. But that usually is the case. We need to have citizens in action, we need to have social demand so that political will can drive change. Perhaps if we are talking about health in this case, we can also take a more preventive role on the way that we craft alternatives. And it's the same when we talk about creating awareness, as some of the campaigns that you mentioned have been able to conduct. So I will invite you to keep in mind those two elements and as we continue to move forward. Now I have in the list of participants Switzerland, please.
Mr. Co-Chair, Excellencies, dear colleagues, you asked what are the possibilities for national policies to implement. I'd just like to say two examples for the Swiss policies. We have still in Switzerland about 8 times more deaths from air pollution as from traffic accidents. It's about 2,000 people who are dying because of air pollution problems, and that's nothing also for Switzerland. Another field where we are going to be active is the micropollutants in the rivers. We know we have a big problem, and it affects ecosystems, and we have to deal with. And now the government has decided to invest $1.5 billion for the next 20 years to equip the wastewater treatment plants, and that's a very important issue for both the federal, regional levels, and we're going to work with the cantons. Now, more generally, the facts are obvious, and sound environmental policies are key prerequisite for human health. And it's a fact that the poorest suffer most from environmental destruction. We will not be able to ensure the health of our people if the current destruction of the natural resource base continues. Therefore, a very close cooperation between the respective institution, UNEP, the different MEAs, and WHO is crucial. Let me highlight at the international level just 2 examples. Asbestos. The health impact of the use of asbestos is known to all of us. The Chemicals Review Committee of the Rotterdam Convention has concluded that all criteria to list asbestos under the Rotterdam Convention are met. In the light of this overwhelming evidence, let us list asbestos at the next conference of parties at the Rotterdam Convention next year in Geneva. This would be a strong contribution of the environment policy to both health policy and sustainable development. Secondly, mercury. The risk of heavy metals for human health, such as mercury, are well known. We have also problems now in Switzerland with mercury. The WHO has provided several studies over the last years. And these studies have been an important contribution to us here in UNEP and a key basis to decide to launch negotiations of a global mercury convention, which was adopted finally in 2013 in Kumamoto in Japan. Let us now ratify and implement this Minamata Convention. Thirdly, UNEP's Climate and Clean Air Coalition. UNEP's initiative to reduce harmful short-life air pollutants is contributing also significantly to the limitation of climate change. Thus, like US, we believe air pollution and climate change are interlinked. That is also why we support the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Now, in order to deliver on the 2030 agenda, cooperation, coordination between environment and health, between UNEP and WHO will be very important. At the same time, each institution has to contribute based on its core expertise and competence. Therefore, we mean UNEP should, firstly, provide the scientific information to understand the global environmental challenges, which also pose challenges for human health. Secondly, UNEP shall develop the overarching policy guidance and political environment to address these challenges. And thirdly, UNEP should stimulate, trigger, and promote implementation on the ground, capacity building, and support. By doing so, UNEP is not only helping to protect our global environment, but also the health of the people, and especially of the poorest amongst us, women and children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. And I beg distinguished delegates and ministers to keep the amount of your interventions up to 3 minutes so that we could have a larger interaction. I will now invite Mr. Omar Abdi, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director for UNICEF, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Vice President, Excellencies. Both the co-chairs and the speakers that spoke talked about the links between, of course, healthy environment and healthy poor. I will take from where the delegate from Switzerland left it, which is the impact on children and women. Children are more affected by environmental factors simply because they're children, because children eat and drink more and breathe more air per unit of body weight than adults. Therefore, they bear the brunt of the impacts of air pollution and unhealthy environment. In fact, as the report for the event reminds us, 26% of under 5 deaths are caused by environmental impacts on health, a much larger share than adults. Each year, nearly 600,000 children die from indoor and outdoor air pollution, the majority from pneumonia, 1 every 35 seconds. Diarrhea, also linked to an unhealthy environment, kills 1,000 children per day. Beyond pollution, consider the impacts of climate-related natural disasters on young lives. Consider the schools and health facilities destroyed over and over again in the cyclone-prone Pacific Islands, or the uncertain futures of more than 500 million children who live in extremely high flood risk zones, or the 160 million children living in the areas of high and extremely high drought. Poor children and families are more likely to live in polluted areas, posing a constant risk to their health. Their schools, water systems, and health infrastructure risk being wiped out in disaster after disaster. In the aftermath of disaster, they are more likely to be denied health care, food, education, water, and sanitation. And therefore, they are more likely to fall victim to the effects of pollution, poor nutrition, and stunting due to failed crops, and even malaria. So to respond to your question, Mr. Chair, there are some unique opportunities to begin the difficult but necessary transition towards a healthy environment and therefore healthy people. The first opportunity I would like to outline is to address, as some of the speakers mentioned, air pollution, but particularly limit children's exposure to it in order to reduce child mortality and improve children's health. As governments begin to implement the reduced emission targets they set at COP21, we need to raise awareness about the impacts of prolonged exposure to harmful emissions, especially pneumonia, to help parents and caregivers improve their understanding of this critical health issue. And so UNICEF will collaborate with government partners, UNEP, other UN agencies, civil societies, and business to build the Every Breath Counts coalition dedicated to turning up the volume on the issue of air pollution and pneumonia. Similarly, to lower carbon emissions and reduce pollution, UNICEF is supporting several countries. For example, we are helping rural households in Burundi use safer lighting, reducing costs and air pollution. Our Bangladesh office is supporting 40,000 households with fuel-efficient cook stoves, improving children's and mothers' health, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, decreasing local environmental degradation and deforestation, and helping households save money. The second opportunity is to work towards accelerating the achievement of water and sanitation goals in order to reduce death from diarrheal diseases, another major killer of children. The world made great progress over MDG period. 2.6 billion people gained access to improved drinking water, but more must be done. Over 660 million people are still without an improved drinking water source. This means not only using science to detoxify the environment and improve water safety, it also means making progress towards zero open defecation. In Eritrea, for example, we have worked with the government to end open defecation in 600 villages since 2008, improving the lives of nearly 600,000 people, or 30% of Eritrea's rural population. The third opportunity is to design child-sensitive policies that put children at the center of climate change efforts. For example, UNICEF worked with the government of Vietnam to strengthen child rights in the country's new law on environmental protection, the importance of human rights as mentioned by the chair. Zimbabwe has put in place a climate change strategy that puts children's needs and vulnerabilities at its heart. And Indonesia's national climate risk database includes a special focus on the specific needs of children in climate-related disasters. These are examples I'm giving. And the fourth opportunity, and the last I would like to outline, is the climate-resilient development. from Bangladesh's efforts to capture and purify water during the monsoon season to save it for a future emergency, to Madagascar's efforts to build cyclone and flood-proof schools, to Ethiopia and Niger's investment in decentralized community-based health and nutrition programs that have saved lives by bringing services closer to those who will most need them in future climate-related disasters. We cannot always prevent disasters from happening, but we are able to support communities in their efforts to prepare for and mitigate their effects. A healthy environment and therefore healthy people are everyone's responsibility. Every family, every community, every country, every government, every business, every organization, all of us. And more, supporting the lives of children in every instance is everyone's responsibility too. After all, they will be the ones to inherit our planet and shape it for future generations. We cannot fail them. And ministers, with your support, we won't fail them. Thank you.
Thank you, UNICEF. We are pretty sure you not. Both the intervention of the United States and Switzerland pointed out to the contribution to specialized agencies to sustainable development, and I should also mention the climate resilient development. The presentation of UNICEF quite points out to that critical role that we should also seek to see in the future. Now we have the intervention of Argentina. Perhaps we can come back to Argentina después, seguro no está. I would like to ask, please, Turkey to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Chair, I would like to thank you, the UNEP Secretariat and the Kenyan government on behalf of my country and wish you a successful meeting. Air quality, climate change, chemicals, floods, food security, urban planning, transport service, water and radiation are among fundamental issues that concern environmental and human health. It is not possible to achieve the goal of healthy environment, healthy people without cooperation among multiple sectors. This goal calls for further collaborations and know-how. While the protective measures to be taken early on may sound costly, we believe that this is a more effective and efficient method given the fact that the improvement of disrupted environment would cost a lot more and lead to irrecoverable damage. In addition, it is of importance to be responsive to problems, update information on a constant basis, and engage in close collaborations with industries of relevance. This matter is associated with a society's economic structure and economic development efforts, and closely related with any urbanization process. Emphasized at both local and national levels with significant awareness and forging a public opinion recently. The trio of environment, health, people constitutes one of the priorities for Turkey. The 10th development plan of Turkey features 6 goals concerning health, environment, healthy people, out of its 17 goals, and this is a testament to the importance attached by Turkey to the trio of environment, health, people, and to the fact that Turkey identifies them with one another. Within this framework, I would like to note that an environmental air quality assessment and management system has been introduced in Turkey, and that Marmara Clean Air Center and the Air Quality Monitoring Network have been established in line with the regional air quality network. There are 210 fixed and 4 mobile stations integrated with the air quality monitoring network. Turkey also has drawn up national and regional emergency action plans in order to prevent seas from being polluted by petroleum and other harmful substances as a result of an accident. In an attempt to put up an effective combat against marine litters, we completed the project on the Strategic Action Plan on Marine Litters. While the number of air pollution measurement stations has reached 269, the number of blue flagged beaches, which is an indicator of a clean sea, has accounted for 444 in 2016, and Turkey ranks second around the world in this respect. In Turkey, a total of 269 ports provide services to take the delivery of vessels. Turkey adopted the National Climate Change Strategy in 2010 and the National Climate Change Action Plan in 2011. One of the main topics of the National Climate Change Action Plan is human health. In addition, Turkey went one step beyond this goal and released the National Program and Action Plan on reducing the effects of the climate change on health in 2015. As a part of the National Program and Action Plan on reducing the effects of the climate change on health, we have established a road map that covers all the health care institutions in Turkey and sets short, mid, and long-term goals. In order to fulfill the responsibilities set forth in international and regional conventions, it is necessary to exert efforts in cooperation with universities, non-governmental organizations, and research institutions. We think that it is imperative to resolve physical, chemical, biological, sociocultural, and economic problems in order to achieve the goal, healthy environment, healthy people. Within this scope, the role of environment in achieving sustainable development goals is undeniable, as it accounts for almost 24% of diseases and nearly 23% of total mortalities. I would like to underline the fact that the recycling practices and the use of sustainable production and consumption patterns and renewable energy sources are extremely important to combat against the air, water, and soil pollution caused by industrial activities in particular. The use, transfer, and dissemination of innovative and clean technologies will enable to make strides in fight against climate change. One of the major problems facing us in terms of achieving the goal, healthy environment, healthy people. Within this context, we believe that it is a requisite to back and strengthen aids of any nature to the developing countries in particular. On the other hand, complementing the goal, healthy environment, healthy people, can only be achieved through the synergy of international convention. As I conclude my remarks, I would like to emphasize that what is urgently needed is to put practical instruments into effect for sustainable development and strengthen collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Turkey. I would really like to ask distinguished colleagues to keep the time to the minimum of 3 minutes, to the maximum of 3 minutes. We have 20 more countries to come. And as we continue the way forward, I would like you also to invite to continue the discussion and react to the presentation of the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. I will now give the floor to Fiji.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. We would like to first congratulate the Presidency of UNEA2, and we are reassured by the fact that with his leadership, the businesses of UNEA will be ably managed. We also would like to take this opportunity to thank the past President of UNEA for her able leadership. We are glad to note the shifting of the focus of UNEA to address a healthy environment and healthy people. It is an important interface. Further to the statement by the Honorable Minister of Tonga, on behalf of the Pacific Island countries, we would like to extend our sincere gratitude to the government of the Republic of Kenya for their warm hospitality ever since we stepped into their soils. This beautiful city, with its wonderful weather and delightful people, has stolen our hearts. How can we forget on this moment as well Mr. Akin Steiner, the outgoing Executive Director of UNEP, and being able to provide the right platforms for UNEP to be positioned to deliver on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. UNEP is indeed at a crossroads of delivering on the 2030 Agenda, and we thank the foresight and leadership of Mr. Steiner for this. UNEA2 is an important gathering for us as we passionately pursue the many diverse institutional and environmental resolutions. More importantly for us from the Pacific Island country, as a nation, the Oceans and Seas resolutions, one we have deep faith in that will be part of the overall outcome document at the end of this momentous gathering. Mr. President, we are proud small island developing states, but like others that share the same island's identity, you'd like to also be known as a large ocean states. Oceans must not be used as dumping ground to achieve our economic aspirations. We also feel that the governance of oceans is somewhat fragmented. We need a holistic approach to address oceans and seas management. We continue to show leadership in this area in international commitments and the visions to be identified as a large ocean state. Fiji, I am proud, was the first country to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas in 1982. Moreover, Mr. President, I am proud to also highlight that Fiji was also the first country to ratify the Paris Agreement early this year. Mr. President, the numerous environmental challenges we face in the Pacific, like other small island states, is well documented. We ask the UN family, especially the more developed ones, and willing donors, to mobilize resources to address these issues. On that note, we applaud the wisdom and the kind-heartedness of the government of Sweden and its people to co-host with Fiji the UN Conference on Oceans and Seas in my beautiful islands in June of 2017. We hope that you will all set aside this date and experience what we have to offer during the conference as we strategize to address not only SDG 14, but a range of other related SDGs. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiji. We look forward to attending this important meeting. I would now like to invite Mr. Braulio Ferreira de Sousa Diaz, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Good morning to all. The CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, has been dealing with the interlinkage, several different kinds of interlinkages between biodiversity and human health. I thank the U.S. representative for reminding us about that milestone publication by Rachel Carlson, Silent Spring, in 1962. And although many good efforts were made after that in terms of legal provisions and institutional organizations created, we have to agree that still 50 years after that, the concerns raised in that book are still valid throughout the world. Just last February, we had seen the launch of the first thematic assessment produced by the Intergovernmental Platform on Science Policy for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, dedicated to pollination, pollinators, and food systems. And the reason for that report is because of the continuous decline and disappearance of pollinators in many parts of the world. And the consequence is the threat to food security, because we depend on pollination, which is just one of the many different ecosystem services to ensure food production and the quality of our food for many crops. I think the concerns that we have been raising in the CBD is that on one hand, both biodiversity and human health are impacted by environmental degradation. So there's a common causality there. But then there's a number of synergistic aspects between environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity or change in biodiversity, and further consequences to human health associated with the spread of infectious diseases, for example. Professor Andy Haynes reminded us this morning about several of these interlinkages. So diseases like cholera, malaria, and so many others are totally associated with environmental degradation and the spread of the vectors and the pathogens that causes these diseases. And of course, with globalization and climate change, the risk of further spread of these pathogens and their vectors are even growing. So it's a very important issue. However, there's also, I would like very much to talk about another issue, which is in human health systems, we need to put more emphasis on keeping people healthy, not just treating illness and diseases. So prevention is much more cost effective and much better for society. So we need an enhanced effort at national and global levels to strengthen the partnerships between health sectors and environment sectors to keep people healthy. And there are many aspects. Nutrition is one. So the health of people depends very much on having access to healthy food and nutritious food. And this is one of the key interlinkages that we need to pay attention to. Also, the issue of microorganisms and how interdependent we are with microorganisms. So we host in our bodies 10 times more cells of microorganisms than cells from our own body. And new scientific research in the last decade has increasingly demonstrated that many non-communicable diseases are associated with imbalance of microorganisms in our own body. So paying attention to reestablish a healthy interlinkages with microorganisms is crucial. The whole issue of excessive use of antibiotics, for example, in inducing more speedy development of resistance on the part of microorganisms is one of the key more recent problems that we have to face, because this is eliminating the one of the most powerful tools we have in medicine to combat diseases and keep people healthy. So we're losing very fast these tools because of unwise and unnecessary use of antibiotics. The whole issue of the immune system that our co-chair mentioned, the development of healthy immune systems requires a healthy exposure of children to the environment to develop a healthy immune system. And nowadays, the excessive use of chemicals to keep everything excessively clean, for example, is preventing that contact between our bodies, especially in the children's, to the environment and to develop a healthy immune system. And this leads to this widespread of allergies, for example, and other illnesses. Other very important aspect that we want to highlight more is how our body and our mental health depends on having good exposure to nature, to green spaces, especially nowadays that more than half of the people in the world lives in cities, and very often they don't have access to green spaces. So there's an increasing body of knowledge indicating just how dependent our body and mental health are with linkage, access to nature and green spaces. For example, recent research demonstrate that patients in hospitals that have access to green areas, they recover faster and better. So it's a whole increasing area of knowledge. I want to highlight that last year the CBD published in partnership with the World Health Organization a very lengthy report called Connecting Global Priorities, Biodiversity and Human Health, a State of Knowledge Review, with the help of more than 100 scientists, covering 16 chapters with many different aspects of these interlinkages between biodiversity and human health. So our call is that we really need to pay more attention to prevention than just to treatment of illness, and keeping healthy ecosystems, healthy ecosystems, for example, is essential for reducing vulnerabilities to disasters, as mentioned by my colleague from UNICEF. So the Sendai conference last year in Japan recognized the importance of natural ecosystems to reduce these vulnerabilities. And also, much of the poor people in the world depends on natural ecosystems for access to their food. So the forests, or the other kinds of natural ecosystems, the rivers, the oceans, for access to food to complement what they can buy in the market. So it's not just agriculture, but also the provision of food that natural ecosystems can keep providing us. So there's, I think, enough good arguments to push us into a new pathway of increasing partnerships between health organizations and environment organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferreira de Sousa Diaz. And thank you for pointing out those interlinkages between biodiversity and health. I would like to invite you, distinguished delegates, to continue the discussion, keeping in mind the two questions that were presented at the beginning, as well as the presentations of both of the UN agencies during this morning. I will now give the floor to Colombia. Colombia, por favor.
Thank you, Chair. It is estimated that in Colombia, around 7,600 people die prematurely every year due to pollution of air and water. In this sense, we are working on the implementation of a policy for the prevention and control of air pollution, which establishes strategies. Some of them have been mentioned here, even by you, like better quality of fossil fuels, better technologies for vehicles, and the promotion of alternative ways of transportation. And they have shown and demonstrated improvements in terms of air quality, reduced impacts on health, and are very well aligned with our strategy to combat climate change. But at this point in Colombia, I would say that our biggest concern is with regards to the effects, the negative effects both on water and on air of mercury, especially mercury used for illegal mining. That's why, amongst other activities, we are working to ratify the Minamata Convention, and we enacted the mercury law that will end the use of mercury for mining activities by 2018 and for all other activities by 2023. But without a doubt, and in accordance with what Mr. Braulio Ferreira was saying, the biggest priority in terms of achieving a better health and a better environment is the implementation of our policy for comprehensive management of biodiversity and ecosystem services that has as its main goal to incorporate the environmental dimension in economic growth and in the well-being of our population. To use an example, to have enough water and the quality that we need we need to guarantee the health of our forests and of our strategic ecosystems so that they can provide fundamental ecosystem services such as housing biodiversity, producing biomass, water regulation, the formation of soils, and the incorporation of CO2. And these ecosystem services are fundamental to guarantee food security, the generation of energy, and the well-being and health of our population. Finally, Mr. Chair, I would like to return to what was said yesterday by the representative from IUCN in terms of the need to widen the scope of UNEA and to get more influence of other actors. At this point in Geneva, we're having the World Health Assembly, and we're talking about health and environment here in Nairobi. I believe that if we want a true integration, we need to be discussing topics like this together with the ministries of health, not having two different events at the same time and talking about health and environment. So I think that that's one of the most important challenges that we face as ministers of environment and as UNEA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colombia, for pointing out for the need of integrating approaches and synergies among our work. I would like now to give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's almost unbelievable when we think that since UNEA won only 2 years ago, we have concluded 3 major processes with direct implications on sustainable development. They are the 2030 Agenda, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and the Paris Agreement. We are proud of the role Brazil played in strengthening UNEP, and we intend to maintain our firm commitment to UNEA so as to ensure the mandates provided in Rio+20. But now we have the responsibility of setting the right standards for the upcoming sessions of UNEA. Nevertheless, the complexity and the ambition of the 2030 Agenda should not diverge us from the true nature of the SDGs, that is, integration and universality. The SDGs were designed to be inseparable and interdependent and applicable to all countries. We must not only work with the goals, but also explore their synergies. It has been highlighted just a minute ago by the Executive Secretary from CBD about the simultaneous work of UNEA and the World Health Assembly on the impacts of environment and health. We should be more attentive to this in the near future. And coming back to the issue of integration, that is why Brazil is a strong advocate for systemic integration. We will be doing a disservice to the 2030 agenda if instead of adapting the system to the agenda, we fall into the trap of adapting the agenda to the current system. SDG 3, for instance, about good health and well-being, calls all countries to ensure healthy lives and to promote well-being for all at all ages. This goal, as well as the other ones, is not a standalone goal. It is linked, for instance, to availability of water and sanitation, to the elimination of hunger and to the promotion of food security, to ending the inequality within and among countries, and most definitely to climate change, just to name a few interlinkages. So to achieve these and all other SDGs, it's essential that we keep the cohesion of the 2030 Sustainable Agenda. Eliminating poverty, promoting economic growth, and environmental governance must be kept high in our priorities in order to make true the commitment of transforming our world. So let's keep the faith to our promise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brazil, for your remarks, particularly on the systemic integration of the 2030 agenda and adapting the system to the agenda as opposed to adapting the agenda to the system. I think that was a very good point that you brought up. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me make an announcement that the multi-stakeholder dialogue will start at 1:30 in this room, so we have up to 1:30 to continue this session, and I hope that all our distinguished participants and delegates will abide to the three-minute time that we have for each intervention. I'd like to invite you on to three guiding questions which we've had from the beginning of this session, which are some of the priority areas where UNEA can deliver accelerated results in decarbonizing and detoxifying our economies, decoupling resource use and changing lifestyles, and enhancing ecosystem resilience. What support is needed to enable delivery at scale? How can new or strengthened partnerships contribute to providing an integrated response to addressing environment and health linkages to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals? And I'd like to also react on some of the points brought up, and I came across, and I was really fascinated by this, I came across to a reference, and I think that this is probably the first reference on air pollution and on the link between air pollution and health in any scientific document in human history. And that was a reference to air pollution in Avicenna's treatise, the Canon, or the Qanun of Ibn Sina. And it was very interesting, it was fascinating to see that 700 years ago, 7 centuries ago, Avicenna had referred to the issue of air pollution, bad air, as adversely affecting human health, and that they have to refrain from areas where the air is bad. And he has pointed to smoke as one of the reasons for bad air or air pollution. So that was very interesting, and we're going to register that in the memory of the World Register at UNESCO, because I think that that's very important. That's one of the first references that we have in scientific literature to the linkage between health and air pollution. So now I will give the floor to Spain.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Señoras y señores, antes de tratar el tema de salud y medio ambiente, quisiera muy brevemente expresarles nuestro interés sobre el tema del diálogo ministerial en el que ayer, por cuestiones de tiempo, no pudimos intervenir. En España estamos firmemente comprometidos a superar el desafío de incorporar todas las dimensiones del desarrollo a nuestras políticas, que deberán ser revisadas a la luz de la nueva Agenda 2030. En este contexto, no podemos permitirnos, gobiernos, sociedad civil y Naciones Unidas, no considerar la voz de UNEA para acometer este desafío. En este sentido, las recomendaciones de UNEA deberán ser muy tenidas en cuenta por el Foro Político de Alto Nivel. Muy brevemente, pasando ya al tema que nos ocupa en esta sesión, quisiera remarcar que son muchos los retos a los que nos enfrentamos los gobiernos para propiciar la salud de nuestros ciudadanos. Si bien la relación entre las condiciones ambientales de una población y su salud se conocen desde hace tiempo, cada vez es más urgente e importante realizar un abordaje integrado de ambos conceptos. Como consecuencia de todo esto, consideramos que debemos adoptar políticas integradas que faciliten las sinergias en este ámbito, y para ello debemos mejorar la comunicación y la cooperación entre las distintas áreas de las administraciones con competencias en las materias. En cuanto a los ejemplos de buenas prácticas de acuerdo a este enfoque integrado, me gustaría mencionar algunos programas españoles concretos en materia de prevención de riesgos ambientales. En materia de calidad de aire, aspecto clave para proteger la salud de los ciudadanos y el medio ambiente, estamos implementando las medidas previstas en el Plan Nacional de Calidad del Aire y Protección de la Atmósfera 2013-2016, que fue elaborado con la participación de las partes interesadas. El plan incluye medidas de carácter horizontal como las relacionadas con la información, concienciación, investigación y fiscalidad, así como medidas dirigidas a sectores concretos implicados en las emisiones de contaminantes. Asimismo, emprendimos en 2007 2 estudios de investigación sobre la presencia y vigilancia de contaminantes orgánicos persistentes, metales pesados y otras sustancias en el medio ambiente y en los seres humanos. En conclusión, creemos que es el momento de consolidar las acciones y políticas ya en marcha y mostrar sus múltiples beneficios en relación con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, maximizando las sinergias del trabajo realizado en las diferentes organizaciones de Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Spain, and particularly for the point that you made on maximizing synergies, which is very important in this regard. I'd give the floor to Venezuela.
Muchas gracias. Señora Presidenta, señores ministros, invitados especiales, distinguidos delegados, señoras y señores. Permítanme expresarle en nombre del Gobierno de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela nuestro agradecimiento al Gobierno de Kenia, así como a la Secretaría por la organización de esta Asamblea. Señora Presidenta, en primer lugar, queremos sumarnos a lo expresado ya anteriormente por el representante de Argentina en nombre del G77 Machina. Señora Presidenta, el planeta enfrenta una profunda crisis ambiental generada por un modelo civilizatorio basado en patrones de producción y consumo insostenibles que destruyen los ecosistemas y producen inequidad, injusticia y pobreza. Ese modelo es el capitalismo. Ha ignorado por décadas la capacidad de carga y de reposición de los ecosistemas. Hace 17 años el pueblo venezolano decidió enfrentar esta crisis, que no solo es ambiental, sino también política y social, comprometiéndose con la transformación del sistema que la genera. El proceso revolucionario venezolano ha dado de una manera sin precedentes la máxima importancia a la defensa y promoción de los derechos ambientales de nuestro pueblo. La República Bolivariana de Venezuela se encuentra profundizando su propuesta de sociedad en el contexto de un paradigma ambiental humanista, productivo y diversificado, dentro de un enfoque ecosocialista, avanzando hacia una sociedad más justa donde las comunidades organizadas constituyen el núcleo espacial básico del nuevo Estado. En Venezuela, el poder reside en los ciudadanos y en las ciudadanas organizadas, empoderados de valores, herramientas y recursos que los orientan y alientan a estar cada vez más conscientes de la responsabilidad de conservar y usar sustentablemente los recursos naturales. En este contexto, en la Ley del Plan de la Patria 2013-2019, en su quinto objetivo histórico, establece y nos compromete a contribuir con la preservación de la vida en el planeta y en la salvación de la especie humana. Así, nuestro gobierno ha asumido el compromiso de lograr la erradicación de la pobreza, universalizar los derechos sociales, garantizar la gratuidad de la salud y la educación, y avanza en la construcción de millones de viviendas a través de la gran misión que la lleva adelante y la construcción de ingentes obras de saneamiento y de servicio. Todo ello en concordancia con la Agenda 2030 sobre el desarrollo sostenible, mediante políticas sociales inclusivas, soberanas y cónsonas con la gestión sustentable de los recursos naturales, legado de nuestro comandante Hugo Chávez. Señora Presidenta, el carácter universal de la Asamblea de las Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente, el cual hoy reivindicamos, no debe verse como la simple ampliación de los miembros que participan, sino como la convergencia de ideas y propuestas en su más amplio espectro, dando espacio a los diferentes enfoques, visiones, modelos e instrumentos de cada uno de los países que la conforman, en función de nuestras circunstancias y prioridades nacionales para lograr el tan anhelado desarrollo sostenible. Cada país tiene derecho a articular alternativas de desarrollo de acuerdo a sus propias características ancestrales, sociales, históricas y de acuerdo a sus condiciones objetivas que deben expresarse y quedar manifiestas en la Agenda 2030. En este sentido, nuestro país viene adelantando acciones dirigidas a crear los mecanismos necesarios en función de avanzar en su implementación. Finalmente, nuestro país reitera ante esta Asamblea el cumplimiento de los principios aquí expresados, a pesar de los planes desestabilizadores, la permanente agresión internacional contra nuestro país, la guerra económica y la más cruenta campaña mediática internacional a que haya sido sometido país alguno, las cuales hemos venido denunciando ante el mundo. Señora Presidenta, esa es nuestra verdad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Venezuela, for pointing out the political and social linkages and the humanist environmental paradigm that your country is following. Now, the floor is for Bangladesh.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my sheer privilege to participate in the high-level segment of Second UN Environment Assembly. Let me begin with the applaud to all the member states of UNEA as well as UNEP for choosing the themes of UNEA 2. Those are very pertinent to overcome environmental problems faced by the countries which are the most vulnerable. Madam President, Bangladesh is not only facing the local environmental problems, but also global environmental threats. Bangladesh has long been urging the global community to come up and address the problems of climate change with active role in mitigation. As this is scientifically established that temperature rise above 2 degrees Celsius would be creating fatal blow to our lives and livelihoods. Madam President, it is proven that more carbon in the atmosphere equals more poverty. We cannot make sure sustainable development without tackling climate change, and we cannot tackle climate change without addressing the root causes of poverty. Climate and development are locked together through basic cause and effect, and that is why we are urging for transformation to a low carbon economy to stay well below a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise. Madam President, towards addressing climate change, Bangladesh has been developed Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan with 6 pillars of actions: food security, social protection and health, comprehensive disaster management, infrastructure, research and knowledge management, mitigation and low carbon development, capacity building. Our Honorable Prime Minister has been awarded with the Champions of the Earth in 2015 for the outstanding effort of the nation on addressing climate change and conservation of our environment. Madam President, Bangladesh has shown a great deal of success in achieving the MDGs. Bangladesh is committed to perform with vigorous initiatives in attaining sustainable development goals. Our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has given it a high priority to implementation of SDGs. A committee headed by the Principal Secretary of the Prime Minister Office has been formed to supervise the progress of implementation of SDG. Madam President, there is sheer inequity in consumption of world's resources. We have to consider the fact that the resource utilization and pollution go hand in hand, as the richest 1 billion people consume 72% of global resources, against only 1% is consumed by 1.2 billion extreme poor. Developed countries must also take on obligations in relevant areas to extend meaningful cooperation to the developing and least developed countries towards achieving the goals. The developed countries must provide enhanced financial resources, technology transfer, and capacity building support to the countries which are in need to meet the vast requirements of attaining sustainable development goals. Madam President, Bangladesh strongly believes that SDGs must be an agenda for development and an agenda that can drive sustained and inclusive economic growth in the developing countries. We also believe that economies and societies could not grow and thrive within the means of the planet without environmental rule of law and the green economy, including sustainable consumption and production. Excellencies and friends, we have a great challenge ahead of us. So we are determined to achieve success in environmental conservation. Let us all work together and create a network of cooperation to reverse the challenges. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bangladesh, particularly for the point that societies cannot thrive without an environmental rule of law. Now I invite Dr. Leonardo Transede, Associate Professor, Department of Environmental Medicine of the New York University School of Medicine, to take the floor. Dr. Transede, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished chairs and excellencies. It's an honor to be here. And as a pediatrician, I'm delighted that others, my colleagues, have already emphasized the unique vulnerability of children to common hazards in the environment, especially those of synthetic chemicals. In particular, I'd like to draw emphasis to the impact of chemical exposures and the permanent consequences of early disruption of development. We already know that in the first years of life, even before birth, that the developing brain can suffer subtle injuries that can have permanent and lifelong consequences. We know that air pollution can reduce lung function in children and predispose to adult chronic lung disease, and increasing evidence raises serious concerns about subtle disruptions of hormonal functions in our bodies that are crucial to physiologic functions that span across the life course. And indeed, extremely strong evidence suggests that synthetic chemicals in the environment substantially contribute to disease and disability. And recent report by the World Health Organization and the United Nations Environment Program has drawn special emphasis to the impact of synthetic chemicals on endocrine processes and disease contribution, which in Europe alone costs 157 billion euro each year. What I'd like to focus my remarks going forward are on a more positive perspective that prevention works, and prevention also saves substantially our economy as well. What we know through the experience of phasing lead out of gasoline is that to this day, the global economy receives a $2 trillion stimulus, roughly corresponding to a 4% increase in GDP due to prevented disease and disability, simply because of tremendous progress we've already made in getting lead out of gasoline globally. And fortunately, we have another opportunity for low-hanging fruit before us today, and that is the effort to phase lead out of paint in particular. If it's possible to bring up my slides, I have two, and I'll limit those to two, and if they can't appear, I will continue regardless. What we know is that substantial gaps remain in the regulatory framework to limit the use of lead in decorative and other paints. And in particular, those gaps are most profound and prominent in low and middle income countries for whom children represent the natural and sustainable resource for future economic development. Insofar as childhood lead exposure impairs the developing brain, the consequences for the lifespan are reduced IQ and cognitive potential and reduced ability to contribute to the economy. What I'm delighted to have developed in partnership with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is a website that depicts globally the costs of childhood lead exposure to this day, which comprise each year nearly $1 trillion, roughly corresponding to just over 1.2% of GDP. And that website is at www.nyulmc.org/pediatric lead exposure. And that website puts in sharp relief and contrast the disproportionate burden that developing countries face due to childhood lead exposure. Insofar as efforts can be made now through the Global Alliance to eliminate lead in paint, that economic loss can be recouped in improved economic development for developing countries and improved health for the next generation of our children. And so insofar as we can implement proactively laws to restrict lead and other chemical hazards that are the most problematic for youth, we can have a both greater sustainable development, improved health, and a better economic future. So I thank the chairs for the opportunity to present, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Trasende, particularly for this presentation on the issue of lead in paint, and also for the hopeful points that you have that prevention works and it saves lives, and it also saves our economy. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Sweden, but also please be reminded that we have to adjourn the session at 1:30, and that the speakers that have not had the opportunity to speak will have the chance, according to what the Secretariat has told me, they'll have the chance to speak in the afternoon session. So, Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Sweden welcomed this very important report, which shows a strong correlation between environmental and health. The issue needs to be challenged accordingly, both nationally and internationally. And we are pleased that UNEA shines light upon such an important